Horrormail. Here's a letter. Dear S. Rob, I sent this because I have no one else who I can trust. Keep these records safe. These are the records of events, but everything here is true. These events are all strange, but reveal a hidden world. A real world. A hidden world of monsters and horror. And yet it is only when I had collected these together that I realised their value and their danger. Then realising they needed to be in a safe place with someone who would know what to do with them, I thought I should send them to you. It doesn't have a signature. Records of a hidden world, hidden dangers. It would be inadvisable to look at them, which is why they send them to me, knowing I would look at them. How would we know something if there was no proof of it? We only know of the dinosaurs that were fossilised. We know of places that people get back from. We only hear from the survivors or those whose bodies are found. Anything that lies sufficiently beyond may not have much proof, nothing much at all to show of their existence, which makes those things that do exist, those stories that are found, those events that are described, very important. They may not get back, but they may be seen. They may have friends, and people write things down. People go missing. People do not always turn up when they are lost to us. And although this is true, hope can be eternal. But sometimes, when we keep seeking, keep looking, we find what we did not expect in our heart, even on its most optimistic days. A location where our lost ones are. In fact, some people find that location where all truly lost people go to. There is a place where those lost but not dead go, where they are hidden. But this place is not easy to get to. It is not on a map because its location changes, and only in the deepest, most esoteric of hidden knowledge is it known. It has not even a vague location like other hidden lands such as the land of cocaine or Shangri-La. It does not even have a name. But there was a man once who found it, who sought the place. He did so because when his only daughter disappeared, he could not accept her death. He did not accept it because he knew it was not true. He used up all his resources searching. And he did not just look for his daughter. He used the police and then publicity of all kinds. He then convinced teams of people to search with any hope. He contacted every police force and every media outlet, and yet she was not found. But he did not stop there. He searched them by using every psychic he could find. He called upon all occult knowledge he could find, until, hearing of his plight, someone contacted him. She was a woman, tall and not young, but by no means old. In fact, she would be considered quite beautiful, had she not a strange affliction. She had one foot turned backwards. She stood there, one foot facing forwards, and one foot facing back. And yet, her front was to him. She was dressed in clothes that were a mix of types. In some ways the clothing looked quite East Asian, as if from India, and yet with parts that seemed to come from other places, including a finger ring with a horseshoe upon it. When she contacted him, she arranged to meet. He was not suspicious because he would try anything to get back his daughter. In fact, he had tried anything, and so far it had not worked. She was seated at a hotel bar when they first met, and it was when she stood up that he noticed her foot. "Don't worry, my foot is quite well. I am here to help you." "Sorry, I didn't mean to stare," he said. She explained that she knew where his daughter was. She said that the reason he had not found the place is that it is difficult to find a place that changes locations. She explained that she had only walked into it by accident and did not fully walk in, but she knew of it. Her father had told her about it because it was a family legend that told of such a place, and it was the true reason why her family had one foot facing forward and one back. It was a terrible curse wherever they were, and so they had travelled a lot. She explained that she had not told him before because there would be no point unless they were both where it was, because there were few who knew about the legend and no way of seeing where the place would be. He was lucky, and all had aligned so that she would show him there. But he wondered why she thought his daughter was there, and she simply replied that all who were lost are not dead, but not found are there. She knew he had looked everywhere, and if this was true, this was the last place. "But," she asked, "is finding your daughter more important than anything?" "Yes," he replied. "Then going there is the correct thing for you." And so they headed off. The journey there was not far. In fact, it was alarmingly short, not even leaving any time at all for preparation. Also, the distinct idea was given by the woman that there was no time to prepare and go back, and so the man was ushered to a door. The woman warned him that he could lose many things, but he would get all back on the way back. In fact, the door looked quite humdrum, a common door, not even on a large building. But when the door opened, he was still astonished to find that it opened to a wide open space, not at all in volume like what the inside of the building should be. But he walked through, and the woman did not follow him. But yet, when he looked back, he could clearly see the door. He could even see the outside of the door that led through to the world he had left. But he'd only made a few steps and he saw at the side of him a strange creature of the same height as himself, but with strange legs, almost like a cross between a bird's wings and human legs. The entity was sitting down and had a small table, which upon it was a crystal ball. "You should know something," it told him. He was startled and then said, "Hello, I am new here." "Yes, very new by the look of it," said the strange entity. "But you really should know something." "What is it that I should know?" he said. "You should know that as you walk further to find your daughter, that you risk a demon with two eyes, but not where they should be, devouring you." It was a strange statement, and so he asked, "Do you know where my daughter is?" "You will find her easily. Wherever you walk, you will go the same way. You are fated to find her." He walked on, and true enough, wherever he walked, he found himself back on the path, and he decided to just keep walking and see what would happen. But then, all of a sudden, the ground opened up, and as it did so, he grabbed and lost a finger on his right hand. but it did not bleed heavily, and so he took his handkerchief and wrapped it around the damaged hand. But where he had fell looked like a room, and he saw that there was a rope near, and so he took it, but did not turn back. He then walked on and stumbled a while, and saw what looked like an old frog with a book. But as he started to ask the frog where his daughter was, before he could get it out, the frog had whipped its tongue out and wrapped it around his, and then took a knife. But the man tugged, and the frog cried as it cut off its own tongue. But the frog pointed the way, and so, still wanting to find his daughter, he kept on walking. But as he walked, he kept on looking around him, and as he did so, he heard footsteps. And yet wherever he looked, he could not see him. He kept on walking until he saw a snake with the head of a man, and when he saw it, he pulled back. The snake man looked strange, and he thought that he may know of the demon with 2 eyes, but not in the right place. He said that he had heard and seen such a demon. He said it was a fearsome demon, and not one anyone would wish to fight. But then to fight the demon is what you wish to avoid. How do you know that? Said the man. Because I have heard of you also. You are the man who seeks his daughter. And then he explained that he should walk upon the path, that this would lead him to his daughter, but that it was unlikely she would look the same. He told him that he should think of many questions to ask her, so that he is happy that the person he meets is his daughter. But the man was not shocked, because he knew that his daughter would not be the same after all this time, and that she would be hurt. He walked on, and then it seemed that he was coming up to a village, and it had within it different buildings, or at least different structures, but few made to truly resemble buildings, although he had the feeling that there were entities within. But as he walked into the village, his eyes adapted, and he could see that where he was were shops and pubs and even houses. He had no money, but he asked for advice. He asked them where his daughter was. I cannot answer you, you're not from this land. You don't even look right, said a short furry creature. Then another added, I don't care. I will tell him one place his daughter isn't, if I can give him a set of wings. The man did not agree. A single place his daughter was not worth his time. But he found that a slightly taller than himself twisted creature took him by the hand and pulled him to a building. He went within. He did not know what else to do, but he was aware that anything could happen at all. But as he entered, he found what at first looked like a jail started to look better and better organised than above. He prayed that his daughter would be here. But as he walked, a nail thrust out of the wall and gouged out his right eye. It was then that he saw a young woman, almost exactly like his daughter, except that her right leg was facing the wrong way, backwards, and her left arm was also facing the wrong way at the elbow. This was difficult to see because she twisted her arm so that the hand looked as though it was normal and facing the correct way. He could also see that this was already causing arthritis in the elbow. He realised this woman was his daughter, and he grabbed and hugged her. He had no need to question her, because his heart told him it was her. The same heart that told him that she was alive. Realising it was her father, she hugged him, and then the reunion stopped as they realised that they were not home, but they were together. But getting out of the building was not that difficult, because he killed a large muscled, man-like animal that blocked him. In fact, this was his plan all along. He knew that killing anything on the way in would cause problems, make it difficult to find his daughter, whereas killing on the way out would make it easier to make a quicker escape. He also reasoned that this place wanted people to go in, but it did not want them to go out. He walked back up to the village and killed many of the monstrous villagers as he went. They then ran until they came to the path again, and found that the eye he had lost returned to where it was. However, his daughter's alterations remained the same. But they then came to the place where he had fell, and he used the rope he had found to climb back up, with his daughter holding on to him with her good arm. But they were almost out. They only had to walk a short while, and then all of a sudden the man's lost finger returned. You may think that he or his daughter would think this a sign, and that she was meant to stay and he go back. But her will and his were too strong. But as she walked to where the door was, the opening was not there. He remembered that the doorway changed locations, but he imagined that this only happened through the side that led to earth. But he had found the path to his daughter just by walking around, and he had been led to her, and so he thought that if they walked around, they may be led back out again. In fact, they wandered a while until they saw the snake man again, that he had seen on the way in. The snake man chuckled, saying that he had avoided the demon with 2 eyes. He said he had, and would be grateful if he would lead him and his daughter back out again. The snake man said he wished someone had helped him when he had gotten lost, but that he was so much a part of the place, and that there was no going back for him. They both said that he could come with them, but he added that he had chosen to be a snake man, to survive, and so that he would be home while trapped here. The man and his daughter nodded and understood, although she understood more. But the snake man again told them they would find the path, and he and she both walked, the man and his daughter. But as they did, suddenly they came upon the door, and his daughter noticed something strange had happened. As she looked down, it seemed that his finger had disappeared again, the one he had lost and had returned. She looked up, and the eye was not torn out but healed over, and on his right side lay his eye, in the wrong place. "Who are you?" he said. "What are you?" She tried to explain that she was his daughter, and then she heard the snake man again. "It's his finger. It's within him, in a different place." "But what place?" she asked. "It is within his brain. He does not know who you are. He can only remember being here and killing the people." "There is still hope," she said. "His memory can return." "No," said the snake man, "he can't. His memory is gone. He is the demon with 2 eyes, but not in the right place." But as she rushed towards the door, she knew she must leave him. She ran right through the doorway, and as she struggled, she did not try to pull her father through too, and he stayed and screamed as she ran. She ran through the door, and it disappeared, and she was back in the world. She was not as she had been when she went into the strange land. 1 arm and 1 leg were on the wrong way. But all seemed well until one day, when struggling along, she walked along a small road. A door opened up and she heard a voice. My daughter," it said. "I must get her back from that strange land." And a familiar arm grabbed her and pulled her back through the door, the opening she had escaped from. But at least they were together as they were meant to be. I now want to show to you one of the wonders of the world, Salt. Salt has been used for occult purposes for thousands of years. It is believed it has the power to take in magical energy. Salt is commonly used in making holy water. It is said if you say a prayer above salt, that it takes in the magical energy. You would then take the salt and put that into some water, and when the salt dissolves, you will be left with holy water. It also has strong protective properties. It is said that if you put a circle of salt around yourself, that no devil, demon or even ghost can come near. In fact, if they do come near, they will be absorbed within the salt itself. People commonly put salt outside of houses to protect themselves from devils and demons as well. Without salt, no life is possible, although strangely enough, it does kill slugs. But imagine with me now that this salt cellar is a different reality, a different realm, and inside of that is us. We are inside of this salt cellar. But we have no knowledge of that which happens outside. But sometimes something strange can happen, and we leave our reality. This could be considered to be a time slip, a change of dimension. People may think ghosts, demons, aliens, but it does not mean that you have to stay there. Many people believe that there is a reset mechanism, and so you would leave, but you would then end up back in the salt cellar. But this is what worries me. Are we outside looking into this salt cellar? Or are we in fact inside looking out?
A man got out of bed and all seemed the same, except for some reason he did not want to get up. In fact, he had a feeling of dread, that somehow leaving the room was bad and leaving the house even worse. But he simply got on with his daily routine, got out of bed, got dressed, washed, and then made and ate breakfast. But something was wrong, and yet he did not know what it was. Even when he left for work, he had this sense of impending doom. And then he noticed something. It was the people. They all seemed somehow stilted, somehow not expressive at all. All the world was all the same colours, the things were the same shapes, but it was not the same. It was as if the idea of the whole world was somehow dirty. And so the whole world was just, well, less. Even he felt less. But he also felt rather special, sort of chosen, because he knew that no one else knew that something was different. But he was worried, and though he knew what he was feeling was irrational, he decided to go back home, partly because he knew that if it was him that was out of normality, then it could be him with the problem. So he returned, and as he opened the door, he noticed that he was different. He felt more himself when inside than he had when out. He went to make a cup of coffee, and he added the sugar and the coffee and the milk, set the kettle to boil. He smelt the aroma of the ingredients, and they were strong. Stronger it seemed than they were before. It was as if all of the world's ability to have a scent had went into these ingredients. Then the kettle had boiled, and he added the water. The resulting drink was better than anything he had ever tasted, so much so that he was worried. He worried what was wrong with him. So he went to the telephone and talked to Susan, his ex-wife. He wished he could think of someone else to telephone, but he could not. He told her that the world was strange, something was wrong. She told him that she had not noticed, but that now he mentioned it, she did feel a sense of dread. But he knew that seeing him was the last thing she would want. So he simply sat down on his sofa, because what else could he do? He sat and noticed a picture, and something was different. He noticed that the window inside of the house in the picture looked different. The scene looked mostly the same, but what he could see through the window looked different, and so he stood up and looked at it. But it was not as it usually was, so he sat down again. And yet now he could see a little more of the sky when he sat down. but when he stood up he could not see it. There was a whole cloud he could not see when he stood up. The painting had somehow become holographic, but he knew it was not holographic before. It was as if there was an actual outside of a house in the painting. He stood up and walked to the left, as far to the left of the picture as he could go, and this time when he looked at the window he could see the edge of a barn that was impossible to see before. He looked straight on and there was no barn, at least none that could be seen when looking at the painting straight on, but he knew that somehow the barn was real. He walked to the far right and looked at the window within the painting, and he could see what looked like a blonde woman. Then he saw her gasp, and she waved at him. He pushed himself away in shock. He thought desperately, how could this be? How could a picture of a person in a painting gasp and wave? But he remembered what he had thought before, that someone must have altered the painting and made parts of it holographic. This time he stilled himself and went to the far right hand side again, and he saw her again, and she clasped her chest in shock. He felt that whatever was happening, she could be in the same state that he was in. He decided he needed to leave and go for a walk into the garden. He opened the door, but he found that he could not leave. There was a strong feeling that he had to stay, or something terrible would happen. He looked at the door and he could not see any people, and so he left it open and watched, and no one walked past. He lived in a city in somewhere that was quite busy, and so someone should have walked past, but no one did. But as he watched and no one passed, he got a type of calmness, because watching the stillness relaxed him. Because although he knew that something had gone wrong, he knew this deep inside of himself before, but at least now he was calm. But even the birds were missing. At least he could not see or hear any birds, and although he took them for granted, they should be making a sound. He decided to ring someone on the phone, and so he went to the telephone and rang a friend. He dialed the numbers, and yet there was no answer. At first there was ringing, but no answer. He then went and rang someone else, but it was the same, and no one answered. He wondered if it was his landline, and so he rang again on his mobile. He left it at that at first, because he did not want to know if it was any worse. But he could not wait, he had to know, and so he then rang everyone he knew, and nothing. There was ringing, but no one answered. He even rang people he did not know, and started working his way through the telephone book, and still ringing, but no one answered. He was afraid, because he did not know what had happened. All he knew was that the phone seemed to ring, but there was no one passing his door, and that he could not go outside anymore. He pondered, wondering if it was some type of illusion, or if it was some strange madness. But if it was madness, was it his or everyone else's? He tried again to leave, but could not get out. He shut the door, knowing that he just wanted to shut it all out. He then decided to ring another telephone number, but this time it was different. There was no ringing. At first he thought nothing of it, and simply rang another number, and yet again there was no ringing. This time it was not just the people that did not answer, but that their phone had stopped working. This made him feel calmer, because he could now see that it was obviously some type of technical or scientific problem, and as soon as it was fixed, everyone would return. He decided to again look at the picture, and as he walked he could see that it seemed to move with him, as if holographic. Damn clever artist, he said out loud, mostly to make himself feel better. He could see the barn, and even the blonde woman was there, although she was not looking at him, and was instead outside looking outwards. He thought about where she was, and it seemed as if she was trapped outside, near the house in the painting, whereas he was trapped outside of the house, in the actual world. But what was real and what was not seemed just a matter of perspective, and yet he wished that the woman in the painting was inside of the house, so that he could see her. But she was not, and it was at this point that he took a hold of the picture, and took it down from the wall, and sat down and looked at it intently. He decided to take it out of the frame, and he did so carefully, but as he did, he made a tiny tear in the corner of the picture. But he decided it did not matter, because the painting was not precious anyway. But then he noticed that the corner of his room was not as it was. He gasped. It had what looked like a tiny tear in it. He tilted the painting so he could see the woman outside of the house in the painting, and she was gasping too. He did not want to alarm her, and so he placed it carefully back in the frame and placed it to one side. But he found himself transfixed at the tear in his room. He could not understand it because the tear seemed to go on and on. He decided to get an umbrella he had and try to stick it into the crack. He went and got it and pushed it into the crack, but the umbrella disappeared. It didn't go in, it didn't bend, it had just vanished at the tear. He tried to push the umbrella beside the tear and move the umbrella to try to find the edge of the tear, but this time he thought he felt an edge, because it was as if he had felt the edge of the tear. Then the edge of it seemed to give way, and part of the umbrella went in. But when he pulled out, only the part of the umbrella that had not went in remained. The rest had gone, disappeared, as the part had been rubbed out. He was quite confused, and with shaking hands, trying to be careful, he placed the picture back into the frame. But he did not dare hang it up in case it fell, and so he placed it on the table. He then went and opened the door again, the door that led outside, and yet when he opened it there was nothing at all. There was just a white space where the world should be. By this I do not mean that the world was white, but that there was no world, and yet he dare not put his hand outside in case they disappeared. There was just a complete absence of everything. He was shocked, and so he closed the door quickly, so that he did not have to look at it. He turned round, and right there was something out of place, a box. He had not seen it there before, but he had seen it. He rushed over to the painting and picked it up and looked at it. Right there in the painting, where the box should be, but it was not. And yet there was something missing. It was a small table. The small table had disappeared from his room, and as he looked again at the painting, there it was. The box had disappeared from the painting and appeared in his room, and from his room a table had disappeared and appeared in the painting. They had swapped places. At this point, all did not seem to matter. After all, the outside had disappeared, as had everyone else, because he could not ring them. And anyway, if the outside had disappeared, then so must the people. The fabric of reality had seemed to be damaged. And now what was just a painting was alive, and items were changing between the painting and the world. But he realized that this painting must be a world to those there, just as his world, or what remained of it, was to him. He thought, how could such a thing happen? And he thought that maybe all paintings are like that, and all there is are paintings within worlds, created by the existence of other paintings and pictures, with one painting that started it all, painted by the hand of God itself. He had been an atheist his whole life, and now it seemed not just was there a God, but he was an artist, a jokester, and a trickster, with no regard for anyone but himself. He looked again, and it seemed that the woman who had been outside of the house in the painting was now inside, and was waving at him. He waved back while holding the painting with one hand. He hung the painting back upon the wall. He got a pad and a pen and wrote upon it, "The world outside of my house has disappeared. Is yours still there?" And he showed this to her by holding it up in front of the painting. She ran and got some paper and a pen of her own, and held up in front some paper with the words, "Outside is okay here, but a box has gone and a table has appeared." He wrote on another sheet of paper, "The box is here, the table was from here." They gazed at each other, he to her at the painting, and her through the painting to him. He wrote again on the paper the words, "You are within a painting here." She gasped and held up some paper with the words, "Here it is, you who are within the painting." In this manner they conversed again and again. It seemed that his world was the fake one. After all, her world was okay, while his was disappearing. And he watched as objects disappeared around him, as if remnants of his world were trying to be saved into hers. The room he was in was disappearing around him, but things had stopped appearing, they simply were disappearing. The woman who seemed to him to be in a painting was crying, because she could see that this was the end for him. He knew this too, but she had decided to stay with him. Angry, the man punched the glass and it shattered, but the painting was unharmed. He put his hands on the painting and it felt strange. The woman in the painting ran closer and she grabbed his hands. The painting was not that large, but he seemed to get his hands on the inside of the frame, but outside, and heaved himself through. First he put through his right arm and right shoulder, and then he moved sideways so that he could move to his waist, and then he slipped through his left arm. He could see the other room now. The room that was in the painting. The woman looked shocked, and she pulled, and finally his legs slipped through the frame. As he did so, the painting, and yet the painting still bothered him, and he worried what would happen if it was damaged. He found the world he was in was not unlike his own, and the date was 1952, and all seemed well. He and the woman were both shocked. Although the event was described to some government advisers, it was kept secret, but because the date was 1952, there was not so many records that were kept, and so becoming a part of society was easy. He stayed with the woman at first, and then they moved and married. But the man would look at no painting or art ever again. He had a fear that somehow something would go wrong. He was a man from another world, and it was his offspring that gave this story to me. To this day, no one knows what caused it, or whether it will happen again. Maybe on someone's wall is a painting of your home, with you outside of it, and if there is, then what will happen to you?
Here's a letter. That's no good. This is about the Spear of Destiny. This isn't the Spear of Destiny. I know because quite recently I had the chance to lay my hands on the Spear of Destiny. Here's the paperwork. This is all of the people involved in the ritual to steal the Spear of Destiny. Documentation, legal. And here is the Spear of Destiny. Not for you. This one looks much more promising. Nature, a walk in the woods. What could possibly go wrong? Trees, grass, there's no danger there. A walk through the woods in England, a green and pleasant land, not dangerous at all. Nothing at all could possibly go wrong. Or could it? A walk through the woods. A walk through the woods is not usually thought to be eventful. Not thought to present anything that's strange. Not when the wood is so small that it is barely a wood at all, only a few trees over a much smaller area than would be expected. But when you walk through the woods, people are told not to go into mushroom rings. People even look out for the openings of caves and many things. But no one warned him of the trees. No one warns anyone about trees. Trees are our friend, but sometimes they are better friends than at other times. He wandered around the woods a lot. He thought he knew all about them. After all, it was his job to pick up the loose wood. He never told anyone, but he thought that the wood would do perfectly fine without him. But this day when he walked through, a rare place where the branches of two trees crossed, it all changed. At first it was the same, the animals scurrying around that most others missed seeing. But it soon changed when, as he walked further, he heard steps behind him. And he looked around, and what he saw was a raven's head, but much too far up. This worried him, and so he turned, and there it was, a creature with the body of a human, but the head of a large raven. It was a monstrous thing, an abomination, a twisted form, with the brains of an animal somehow grafted onto the human body. An animal's base instincts and low intellect attached to our body, the human body. That body did not belong to it. It belonged to the human race, and by right, it should not have a bird's head atop. It grabbed onto him, around him, and before he could even struggle, he felt other arms around him. And then he saw the head of a cat, again upon a human body. and as the dark, evil-looking, passionless cat's eyes looked on, he found himself dragged into a huge hole in the ground. He was knocked unconscious. He felt himself lose a tooth, but things happen when people are surprised, and when he opened his eyes, he knew for certain that he was insane. He knew it because there was no other explanation, but it didn't matter. He had this nagging doubt that it was real, and it was based on the fact that he had never been ill his whole life. No problems with stress, no depression. He'd had an entire life without mental problems of any kind whatsoever. And this was not comforting, because this did indicate to him that instead of waking up in a hospital bed, that he was taken hostage by monsters. He sat up and saw that there he was in fact surprisingly civilized. It was human-like in decor, and yet also quite different. He felt comforted slightly until he saw the creature with cat's eyes staring at him. It was the height of a woman and had a woman's body, but it was wearing fur, and yet the clothes were a part of it somehow. He said, shouting out loud, "Oh crap," in desperation, but received an answer. "What, do you want a toilet place?" the cat-like humanoid said. It had the curves of a woman and a stately presence, and for all of this it was a terrible sight. He replied, "No, I was just worried." "Well, don't be," it said. But he was worried, and he stood up just to make sure that he was in a good solid position if he needed to fight. But it was obvious from what he could see that he was a long way from the surface. After all, he could not even see a glimpse of real light, and yet the massive candles and glittering crystals kept the place aglow and lit up. He was allowed to walk around, and as he did so, he realised that this strange place was oddly cave-like and yet designed. This was not a place someone had simply dug out. This had been designed and made. It was as if a cathedral had been formed. One thing he did recognise was that this was a design from a totally different culture, with a completely different basis and style. It had similarities, and yet the designs were made and inspired from nature. And the nearest thing he had ever seen was work designed by Anthony Gaudi, who had long passed away. There were growth on the walls, but not real, not growing, but yet so sculpted as to look like branches. It was as anything unnatural, anything not of nature, would somehow destroy the balance. But there were chairs and tables, and these are things that are uniquely human, or at least uniquely Egyptian, because the very first chairs were ancient Egyptian. But the cat-headed being looked like an ancient Egyptian deity, as did many of the entities there, with animal heads atop human bodies. And yet these entities were not gods, they were definitely flesh and blood, and he believed they could be hurt. But doing so would be pointless, it would simply place him within a deeper prison. He knew that he was trapped, but doing anything would mean nothing if he did not know where to run. It was then that the cat-headed being walked over to him. The being explained that although he did not understand, that they did not mean to harm him. In fact, he had been freed but did not know it. The cat-headed being said, "You have been trapped your whole life in a shallow world, one not the true world. Sometimes some of your kind does pass back through, and when this happens, we rejoice. Once long ago, we all lived here, all of us, and your kind, the humans, we lived here. You were one with us. A terrible thing happened." "Yes, really terrible," added a hyena-headed being. "A powerful evil banished you all when you were just a few small settlements. You now only see from the half-world, and so we look less than you and less than we are. You were never meant to be lonely." The cat woman put a hand on his shoulder and said, "But you need never be lonely again." But he pulled away, and she did not understand why. "But that was my world," he screamed. "That was my life, my world." The hyena-headed being spoke again. "You think you are different from us. Well, look at this." She held up a being, a four-legged creature with a human head. But somehow it looked right, at least less unnatural than what he had already just seen. This is a reflection of a human. To you, our heads are animal heads. But is your head any different? These are just half reflections of us. Just as this is not really a human, neither are we animals. My head is not the head of a cat, added the Catwoman. It has my head, and there is a definite difference. He thought that they would say to him that there was no killing and no starvation or some such thing. But there was, although the creature did not seem to kill each other often. But he did notice that an animal had its babies taken away when she had licked it earlier. They did not seem to realise that he knew why, but when, left to sleep at night, he got up and dug a hole where a mound was, which near her abode all underground. When he opened it up, he found a baby's body without a head, but it was certainly an animal hybrid as they were. He knew what the mother had done. She had eaten her baby just as animals do if they start to lick them too much. This is caused by cleaning turning into eating. This was an animal's instinct, and yet the calmness went on too long. He knew when he saw the partly devoured baby that these animals wanted to rip themselves apart but did not. But how long could it last? After all, the cat-headed creatures were still fuller forms of cats, and cats eat rodents, and there was tension between the Catwoman and the mouse-headed people. But they weren't normal mice heads, they were twisted and human-like and large, and placed atop a human body. But the mice people were obviously worried. He was given a small place to live, a small bed, but it was really just an extension of the abode of the Catwoman. She was sort of his nurse, and he was eating food and he knew not what it was and did not want to ask, and they would not tell him. He was nursed and he knew that the place was real, and he also knew that it was not all that there was. He was taught to, even taught to think of himself as an animal, as all humans are. But as time passed, he came to think of himself as an animal, and also not any different from them. This happened as much from the constant presence of them as anything else. He also had given up all hope of ever getting back. He lied in bed, and yet the Catwoman was not there, and she was always there. But this day she was wearing what resembled a skirt, and a white odd folded paper hat. There was a lot of conversation, and the Catwoman and the frog-headed man both told him that he should get to go above ground, so that he would know what it was like. But he was told that it was often difficult the first time, after having been there. But the man was happy, and he walked through a door, after walking through a very long passage that he did not even know existed. The Catwoman and the frogman opened the door and had his hands on their shoulder as they all walked out. The world was not as he expected, and he was not in a small wood. He was surrounded by animal-headed beings. And everywhere was what looked like houses, even tall buildings, and what looked like a complex civilization. As he walked, a few people surrounded him, and they terrified him as they looked at him. He had given up all hope because what he saw was not a portal or anything resembling a way back. But the next day he walked a little further into what looked like a town. But he was quickly ushered back again. Then one day, after having eaten, he walked through the town by a different route, and he walked past a building of glass. He looked into it expecting to see an animal, but what he saw was a human. And he looked into the glass and saw those around him walking around. He saw no animals at all. He saw no apparent sense of animal behaviour, not like he had seen below ground. He saw a complex civilization. He looked at the building and saw not a chink of humanity within it. He began to think things more how they were. This was not Earth in some parallel land. These were not animals, these were aliens. The alien that had looked like a cat-headed one was clear to him now, and she knew it, so she tried to hold his arms as the frog-headed man tried to do the same. But they had made a mistake. They had removed some of the restrictions of human civilization. And he did what he should have done the first time around. He tried not to just survive, but to kill. He gouged the eyes of the Catwoman clean out of her head and ate them. The frogman looked on in revulsion, and he hit him powerfully in the throat. The frogman gripped his throat and choked right there, choked to death. You would think that one human could do very little when surrounded by aliens, but in a world with too much genetic manipulation, much to remove violence, and brains more computer than flesh, everything had to be worked out before it happened. Everything was done by computer. Well, everyone looked as if they were walking around and thinking, but all of the software running the world was either designed specifically for a function such as medicine or to create harmony. Maybe he'd slipped there by accident, but he knew now what to do. He killed and gouged as the aliens stood there. They had no animal instincts at all. They did not know to run. They all tried to gather information. The whole underground space he had been in was to get him to accept them, but he didn't. He did what humans have been doing since they walked the earth. He searched for a weapon to kill. Finally he found one. A simple enough thing, a knife. But he kept on killing and eating. For everyone he killed, he ate something of them, some body part, so that he had the energy to carry on. He thought he had went mad, but he hadn't. It was just the reaction of a rational human mind with a full set of instincts, killing off the competition, just as we had done thousands of years ago. Some would say millions. He woke up back underground, covered in blood, but this time was in chains and was taken above ground. But this time it was a small set of trees, just a small wood. The animal-headed creatures left him there and they cried. He got up and walked. It was not long before he knew he was back in the human world. He soon saw other people, and although they did not believe him, his chains were removed and the locks were of no design known to man. He even went back home, although it was a long time before he felt safe again. Then one day, he sat watching television and the news came on. It said that we were in an uncontrollable ecological disaster, the world was dying, and then he cried. He wondered if we really had been sent here, or whether it was an accident. But it all became quite clear. They went to their realm to escape us, and they had prospered as we had for a while. But while they lived on, and their world is rich in resources, ours is dying. We will have to live on other worlds while our neighbours live happily. They had given him a kindness, a story that he would accept, a story that he could accept and not feel shame. Maybe we'll get back there again, but if we do, we'll be invading and it will be war. And that is why they cried. Their kindness will destroy them. I think we may need some protection just in case some devils or demons or something evil comes through due to listening to these stories. I don't want to get hurt or any damage to occur to anybody. So let's draw on some voodoo power. So I'm going to use PAPERBACK. PAPERBACK is the voodoo man. Without him no voodoo can take place. He walks with a limp and he has a special staff which enables him to open gateways to other realms. We'll also draw on Stygian Petrol, powerful black magic voodoo lore, with power of many types. The only thing he can't do is open gateways such as PAPERBACK can. And so Stygian Petrol must always be used, as all other voodoo lures, with PAPERBACK. Okay, so let's start this now. PAPERBACK, powerful voodoo lure. You walk with a limp because you have one leg in one world and one leg in the other. And even your walking cane is a staff of power. PAPERBACK, you have the power to open the gateway to the other realm. PAPERBACK, open the gates. Open the gateway here and now. PAPERBACK, open the gates. Let the gateway open. Open the gates. PAPERBACK opens the gateway. The gateway is open, wide open. Stygian Petrol, powerful voodoo lure. Powerful mage, step through the gateway. Step through the gates into this world. Stygian Petrol, step through the gates. Stygian Petrol, you are a dwarf with one leg, but you are a powerful mage. And all black magic is yours to control. Stygian Petrol, I ask that you protect us. Protect us from all evil. Protect us from all attacks. Stygian Petrol, protect us. Protect us all. Tiggy and Petro agrees and departs through the gates. We now have to shut the gateway. Papa Legba, close the gateway. Close the gateway from the other round. Close the gateway here and now. Papa Legba, close the gates. Close the gateway. Papa Legba closes the gates. The gateway is shut. So it is and will be. Now you need not worry about ghosts or devils or demons, because you now have TG and Petro, one of the darkest black magic voodoo laws around you at all times to protect you. Don't you feel much, much better? But something harmless is the country, the English countryside. Just grass and trees. Nothing, anything to be frightened of at all. I mean, nothing could possibly happen. What could possibly happen there? Well, now we're going to find out. Transfer. Sometimes when a man lives his life, he comes to difficult times, on times that test him, that make him want to shriek in pain. It was a life without any of the things he wanted. He had not the job he wanted, nor the wealth he wanted. But what he actually wanted was so little to some people, or so it seemed at the time. But the man I talk of is not the man of this event, although in many ways he is. But I feel I must write this as much a way of educating other people on the realities of life, on what can occur. In fact, I must admit that during helping this man, there were times when even I felt a doubt. But from his perspective, his life was difficult. When he saw and heard me walking in a place which sold tea and coffee, he contacted me. In fact, he must have heard what I can do, or else he would not have known to contact me. I had been a describer of truth for a long time, yet it was not something which one could say in a title, because to know what it means you must experience it. He asked for my card, and I gave it to him. In fact, I remembered him mostly because of the bitterness of the coffee I was drinking at the time, and the lack of milk which seemed to make it even more palatable when I met him. I was then sat at home one day when there was a knock at my door. He asked to come in. I decided to let him in because there were other people with me, and I had learned to not let clients into my own life. Even asked him how he knew where I lived, and he explained the person I was seen with knew him. He said to me his life was difficult, and that he felt that there was nothing that could be done. He had not any of the things that he wanted. I replied that does not mean that what you have is not of value. But he was firm on one thing, that he wanted my help, and he said he had heard of a process which could give someone anything they wanted. I nodded. A soul transfer. He asked me whether his soul transfer meant he was selling his soul to Satan. I replied that only if he was evil would his soul go to hell. He said he wanted the process right there. I explained that first his soul must be bound to his body, so that matter is his soul. But I said that this meant that his soul, as long as it was in his body, would not go to the afterlife. He said he knew what this meant, although to him it seemed to simply mean he would die when he died with nothing afterwards. I, however, would not tell him otherwise. I told him that I must have a piece of his hair, and I gave to him a talisman made of the blood of some strange creature with no name, but only for him to loan. I told him he must live and embrace senses alone, and abandon all deep thought for 1 week, to live the life of a hedonist. He agreed and threw himself into his role with abandon. He drank the finest and most alcoholic beverages. He ate the finest foods and had sex with anyone and everyone who would have sex with him. After 2 weeks he was a different man. With the help of the talisman, his soul was firmly placed within his body, bound to its very matter. But when he came back to me, I checked and looked through a crystal ball into his self. All that could be seen was matter. The soul was still there. He said he felt better. and did not feel he needed the other stages until he began to live as he had and realised that he needed greater social status and that he wanted me to attract to him a better career and love. This I did because the process was really just beginning, and what had occurred was merely a form of preparation. For the first process I told him he must kneel down, and I took a dog and a knife and asked him to kill it. He did not want to, but I shouted at him he must, and not to waste my time with sentiment. He eventually killed the dog, and I called on various deities as he did, and I asked him to drink from a bowl on the floor. He did this. As I chanted, I released part of his soul and replaced it with that of the dog. He left happy but bewildered. The next day he awoke and rang me straight away. He told me that on his right toe he had a claw, and that it had never been there before. But by the next day it was gone, and he had a great job, a real career with prospects, and the love of a beautiful woman he had only met. The beauty of her was only matched by the fine words which she shared with him. The claw on his right toe disappeared. He then told me he was not worried anymore. He worked hard and earned more money. But it was more than that. He was invited to the most prestigious of parties, the most difficult to enter societies, and in truth, he did not even need the money he earned, because everywhere he was invited, everything was free. He lived a good life until he realised that his lack of wealth was holding him back, and there were some things he could not do. The woman who he loved realised that she too was not entirely where she wanted to be, and she felt poor. But this man, loving her and himself even more, knew there was a solution, and so he called me again. At this point he said he wanted to transfer part of his soul again, so that he could have wealth. This time he said he wanted to be wealthy, and so he visited me again. This time he wanted to arrange an appointment. How he had changed from the man who had simply came to my door. A meeting was arranged, and I asked him to take a snake. I told him he must know what he is doing, and that his soul had value, but he said he wanted to go ahead. I therefore started the ceremony, calling on various deities, and asked him to cut off the head of the snake, and he did this for me. I then asked him to drink the blood from its neck. He was not loath to do this, and I really believe that he would have done almost anything at all I had asked him. After the ceremony he was tired, and I myself drove him home. He woke again, and when he did, he noticed on his left thigh was a small amount of snake skin. He rang me, and I said that his soul would transform it back again. In a day the skin had gone, and in a week he was very rich, possibly the richest people most person would ever meet. He had a large mansion to live in, and did not need to work, because now he owned so much that it did not matter at all, and he could simply spend his whole life and still not go broke. So much had this man. His chauffeur was driving him home one day when the love of his life clutched her chest, and a doctor was called by telephone. An ambulance arrived, and she and he were taken to hospital. It was difficult there, and she was hooked up to various machines to sustain her life. They were both informed that she had a rare disease, some incurable malady, which they could not treat. It was then that I was called again. He rushed to me and told me to again perform a soul transfer so that she would live. This time I took a cat, and he slaughtered the cat, and I brushed his skin with the fur. He left, and I was told that she did live and made a complete recovery. But after one day he found that he had the left ear of a cat, and wondered why it did not go away. I awoke the next day to be told that he did not look human, and I must be truthful and say that I was very interested in knowing what he did look like. When I drove to pick him up by car, he was covered with a blanket, and yet his hands were not human hands, but some combination of beast and man. When he entered, he took away his sheet, and he asked me why his soul had not made his body human again. I told him, because you have no human soul left. Why did you do this to me? You did it to yourself. You knew the risk. He rushed over to the mirror to say instead, I am just an evil beast. You are not evil, I said to him. You did this to save a life. But your old self is not here. He is over there. I took away a screen, and there in front of him was him, as he used to be, but bathed in light. I am there, he said. No, you aren't, I added. But he is no evil beast, he said. But I said you were not evil, but he is. And as I said this, hands appeared in the floor, and his old self, the now completed soul, was dragged through a hole which opened up in the floor, and as he went down into the ground, all they could smell sulphur. I explained to him that he was noble, and the soul he had given away, a gift from God, was gone, and the animals who were being ill anyway had transformed him. The goodness of animals and the intellect of humanity was his. I took him to an isolated forest. It was surrounded by mountains and released him. The next day the woman who loved him came to see me. She lamented about his disappearance and said that she had secretly known what he had done. He had told her once, but she had then given him the impression that she had forgotten. I told her that he would have known that she would have done this, but it did not seem to matter. I told her that he was altered and that there was not someone else. She said she knew that he had disappeared and that it was linked to the trade he had made. I pointed out that the only way for her to gain him back would be by making a trade herself. I explained what it meant. And although she did not worry about this and seemed to understand already, I told her that her soul had to be bound to her body, but she said she did not have the time, and I said there was no other way. I told her she must defile herself, self-respect, so as much as she could. I told her she must have sex with every man who says yes to her when she asks them for sex, and she must ask all men she meets or communicates with in any way for 1 week. She tried to hide away and to not talk to anyone, and yet she did. At first the mistake was a postman who said hello after seeing her through a glass door. She asked and they both had sex, and then she realised that she had accepted a letter, and it was sent by someone she knew well, but because of the communication, she phoned him, asked him if he wanted to have sex with her. She expected him to say no, but he agreed. However, she had received another letter this time from her company, and she phoned me for guidance, and I said this was unfortunate because she would need to ask every man who worked in that place to have sex with her. She was lucky in so much as the offers was near to her, and she managed to get there without sleeping with more than 3 men. By the time the week had finished, she had sex with a bewildering amount of men, and her soul was bound well and truly to her body. She came to me a changed woman, and asked to perform the ritual. She agreed, and I carried her in a small kitten. The ritual performed, and I told her she must kill the kitten herself, and though she did not want to do this, she killed it. I told her that she must eat its flesh raw and bloody. She wanted to throw it, but did not complain, and by the time she had finished, she was clearly showing the presence of the part of the kitten's soul, and she had the ease of a cat and the claws on her hands. As the exchange had already been made, I bought the creature who had been a man to her. He looked a fearsome sight, and she looked into a mirror and saw herself. She sobbed. Her heart was now so much like the cat's that the feline features did not disappear right away, but she knew that she could not live as she had, looking as she did. She returned as he did. He had nothing to trade at all, but she still had the better part of a human soul. She again asked to make a soul transfer, this time in exchange for their appearance, so they would both look human. The ritual was performed needed her to eat the flesh of a rabbit, which she herself needed to kill. She killed the rabbit easily and ate its bloody flesh. She manifested the features of the rabbit over her feline ones, and then they both transformed back to human form. In the time after this, they lived together happily, and unusually for many clients, we all got very close. This was something I could not understand because it seemed they had only gotten what they wanted through good luck rather than planning or even cleverness. I knew that she would not trade the remaining part of her soul easily, but I waited, and in time they trusted me enough, so much that she wanted to see the hidden forest where he had lived for a short time, and I agreed to show them. I think they thought the place would be some parallel world, even some very far away place, and they were surprised that it was neither. In fact, I drove them to the place. The area was within a mountain, and there was a special entrance that we had to walk through, but the whole area was forest, and they looked around. They looked and realised they were not alone, as from out of the trees came the many different creatures, and none of these either animal or human, but more like intelligent animals aping humanity. But then something unexpected occurred. One of the creatures clawed and attacked the man, who instantly turned back to his creature form. He was ill and in bad health. She said to me, all I want is to be back with him, the man I met. Oh, I said, you want to be with your man, I can help you there. He is within hell. I opened a small hole in the ground beneath her. She was shocked, and hands from the ground grabbed her, and as the hole opened up, she fell. I healed the man to see his pain, and he leapt down into hell also. I laughed and ushered to the other creatures if they wanted to present themselves for feeling their pain, and some of them leapt in, not really knowing what was happening. I write this so that you will know how demons can be made. The man was evil with a bad soul. The woman's soul was good, and yet even she was corrupted and sent to hell. But hell is not an unkinder place as earth, sometimes, and although they were clawed and burnt and remade again and again, the time came for them to graduate from their lower place in hell to some higher position. Up they graduated until they rose up from simply being asked to torture others to more important matters. Each time they moved up a level, they walked through a door to a different part of hell, each looking different from the last, until the time came for them both to re-enter Earth's surface. When they did, they looked as they did now, but they both looked human. They finally took their place on the earth as soul transfer agents, with the missions of exchanging humans for demons, one part of a soul at a time. I tell you this while I laugh, because your earth is now mine. Well, I hope you enjoyed that last story, that last event. Slight problem. On that letter I got, it said here, realising they needed to be in a safe place, with someone who would know what to do with them. That does suggest that I shouldn't have really told you all these stories. Don't worry, you're probably not in any real danger. But just for the next few days, now you've seen it, just be careful if you see things out of the corner of your eye, or if you see the same person many times, you know, if you go somewhere and then you happen to see the same person no matter where you go. If you see any of these things, then be very, very careful. And by all means, do make a will. Okay? This is all very serious, but don't imagine that these things can't happen to you, that the world is a mundane place and that stories are stories. In fact, the world is a magical and dangerous place. And I hope now that I leave you better prepared than you were before. My name is S. Rob, and I hope I have helped everyone.